workflows that you started out with aren't supporting more staff or more content that you need to review and edit. And in this day and age, it's also not just a website that you've got to support with your content. You're going to have mobile apps, a mobile site if you're doing responsive, integration with social media channels and that sort of thing. So you need your technology to keep up with that. Sandy will talk about some of the project management considerations you'll need to do to plan the migration.
So one of the things in migrations is they're often underestimated. It will be kind of tacked on to the end of the project. Oh, right, and we need to migrate our old site into the new one after we've developed this shiny new one. And that tends to be a much bigger task than anyone thought, and it's probably the #1 reason that launches delay in my experience. It's because everything's technically ready, but then it takes a lot longer to get the old content in than they are. So make sure you put it as part of your planning process from the beginning. They tend to expose areas of missing content, things that you have ideas for in a new site that aren't there in the old site. And they also tend to show mismatches between the old information architecture, how your site may be if it had one, or it has one, whether it was planned or not is another story. But it does show the mismatch between that and the new site. There are things that are assumed about the new site that aren't there in the old site. So the types of migrations that you'll do, and you'll probably actually run into multiple ones of these during any larger migration project, is an app to CMS, and I'm specifically meaning an application to CMS, and I'm not specifying which type of application it is. Hand-coded to CMS, so really old legacy websites, and then of course between Drupal versions if you're doing an upgrade. And those, of course, can take on aspects of some of these other things depending on exactly what your needs are. Talking about app to CMS migration, so you'll have legacy applications that may be written in PHP, they may be written in an entirely different language, they may be hosted on an entirely different platform, but nonetheless they need to be migrated. Frequently, what you'll run into in a lot of legacy websites are that you have some homegrown applications that have just been built kind of as needed as time has gone on. This is happening less and less as people are moving, all the older websites have already done one CMS migration, so you may be seeing a CMS to CMS migration, but you'll still see it, and we've seen it as we'll get into in their case study kind of later. So what you're going to want to do is make sure that you're translating the functionality of that site rather than the form. If you try to migrate the form exactly as it used to be, you're going to make things a lot more expensive to build because that legacy form was built possibly specific purpose to one thing and without consideration for the needs of the rest of the website. Things that hopefully you've taken into account as you've gone through the design and planning process for your new site. Be sure that you leverage Drupal. It's got a lot of tools now that we'll talk about later that can help manage this, and also leverage Drupal, what Drupal does well. Don't try to make a square old peg fit into a round Drupal hole or vice versa. It's going to be your friend if you kind of take the functionality and migrate it to the Drupal idiom rather than trying to simply make everything look exactly like it was before, because you're going to frequently, you can do it, Drupal is amazingly flexible, but frequently you'll make things actually harder for someone to administrate. And as part of that, standardize. This helps with your user experience and helps create a consistent metaphor and expectation in the visitor's mind across your website, and helps that consistency reinforce the standardization you're doing as you're migrating this content in, and so you're mapping things from one thing to another. So from a hand-coded website, if you've got a really old content, look at the variability of it. You're probably going to have, if it has been in existence all this time as hand-coded website, it's probably just going to be, as people thought of things over the last, say, 10 years, They just added things to it and added things to it. And so things may not be very consistent, and that tends to be the tendency. However, if somebody has at a previous point gone through, put everything into Dreamweaver, migrated everything to consistent templates, you may actually have some fairly well-structured content which you can actually automate from. There are tools in PHP that let you do that by basically navigating the document object model. But you can also use external ETL tools and things like that as well. However, that's not going to be most of the time. And even when you do that, there are going to be cases where you're going to still need to do a fair amount of cleanup. If you have lots of manual migration, this is why interns were released upon the world. If they are not knowledgeable enough to do that, that may actually be a good way to kind of get them some inside knowledge into the organization. But sometimes they aren't available, or as in one organization we ran into, they actually wouldn't let them do such mundane tasks, which I want to intern at a place like that. In that case, you may have to just do it. So, leverage all of the tools you have on your desktop to take advantage of that. It provides an opportunity to actually leave some of the content undone and then use that as part of your training for administrators to use the new site. So having them migrate some of this content over will give them a good feel for how things are done in the Drupal world and on your new site. So migrating between Drupal versions, obviously, major versions in Drupal, this is one thing that distinguishes it from something like WordPress, which goes to extreme lengths to be backward compatible. Major versions in Drupal are not backward compatible. And frequently, contributed modules just may kind of die off, or better options come along, and so you're not necessarily doing somebody a favor if you simply update the in-place modules to the new version of Drupal. Contributed modules can also lag in updating, as much as there was an attempt in Drupal 7 to make everybody come out simultaneously. There were still key modules that didn't make it by the day of release. And you may, of course, still find bugs because they just haven't been as thoroughly tested as when they get out in the wild. Content and media have to be migrated, and media styles change. If you're dealing with a Drupal 5 site, you may be dealing when people tended to host their own videos. And nowadays, the standard is to try and get as much stuff on YouTube to leverage that kind of platform. But that may not be the case, and so you have to figure out, are you keeping it in the old format and you're making allowances for that, or are you actually doing something new? So when you're planning this, an important part is to map the old to the new. So take your new information architecture, which you've hopefully done, and map the old content onto it. This hopefully is actually part of doing the information architecture in the first place, but nonetheless, it's a place where you'll tend to find out those areas where you need new content that hasn't been written, or you need organization of content that hasn't been done. And you may find old content that kind of doesn't have a place anymore, and you have to decide what to do with it. Part of doing that is deciding very explicitly what to leave behind. Not everything really needs to always be kept when you migrate to something else. And in fact, it can make your life a lot easier and make the new site a lot easier if it lets go of some historic content. That may not always be possible. So have that conversation with the stakeholders early and often about what really needs to come along. Make sure they know that there's a cost to migrating all of that old legacy content, and what would actually be a chance to get rid of some stuff that no longer reflects what the organization's doing now anyway. Allow for exceptions and discovery. So you're going to be frequently discovering new content, especially in an old site that has lots of nooks and crannies where somebody had their own fiefdom for a while and they were adding things to it, and nobody else knew what they were really doing, and they were talking to people who knew where all that was, but the main web team didn't know. That sort of thing happens all the time. So you may discover things, or you may discover that one time they did something else, In one case, we had slideshows that were all alike except for the one that they'd done completely differently than the others. And so we had to have a conversation about them. Do we make the new site accommodate that new type of slideshow, or do we somehow handle it some other way? And in this case, they decided to actually make it into a video, a narrated video. An agile approach can really help, because as you're releasing things, you can start migrating in old content as example and a way to populate it with real data so that you can see both how the new design works with the old content and possibly expose some weaknesses there. And you can decide, you can discover early and often that stakeholders are actually not happy with the old content, and this is their chance to speak out. And so they're going to come and they're going to raise objections, or they're going to have ideas, and you're going to want to manage that process. But just accept that no matter how much planning you do up front, you will run into these things, and an agile approach can really help that. So just keep that review process going as you're releasing things, and make sure they're reviewing the site early rather than kind of waiting till everything's been built, because they can't really review it until everything's there. Try and get them focused on the narrow parts of it to at least get that right before they start looking at how it's integrated into the whole. So one of the things that will help do this, take a content inventory. So you're going to want to just take stock of the current site. Frequently this is actually done before an RFP is ever tendered for a new site, or a new site is even built. There will be one. But it's not always done, and it's not always done well enough, and decisions will change about what actually needs to be migrated and what doesn't. So go ahead and make sure that, even especially if you didn't do that, or if you weren't part of that, you make sure that you're completely up to date to it and verify that it's still accurate, because sometimes a content inventory will be done 2 years ago when the process of starting to get the new website got underway within the organization, and it didn't actually turn out that happened until 2 years later, and that's when things had already changed fairly dramatically on the website, just with people doing their ongoing stuff that they do every day, because these sites don't stay dead, they just keep moving. So identify the functionality you need so that you can do that mapping of functionality and keep it at the functionality level. And this helps you do your planning for the new site in terms of views, models, context. So if you have a need to just simply migrate the old content, then you can plan out how in Drupal that's going to work. Do the information architecture. If you want to have a new way of navigating these things, frequently this is an opportunity for people to say, okay, let's stop reflecting how we're organized inside our organization. Let's talk about the topics that the people we're engaging with actually think about. Well, if everything's been done the old way, it won't necessarily be there in the new way. So you're going to want to map how that content goes from the old siloed approach to the new, possibly in a related approach, or to the new taxonomy structure, whatever it may be. Make sure that you draft your content types at this stage to take advantage of them. You may find, again, things change. You may find that later on the easiest way to handle it is actually to create a whole new content type to take care of this one case where you found a trove of stuff that nobody knew about, and as soon as they found it, oh, that's great, we really need to keep that. And we want it, organized by date and this and a couple of extra fields that nothing else quite has. You might have a new content type. So just keep drafting those and having sitemap and navigation in mind so that this kind of informs the mapping of your site, the old content to the new site. And this also helps as you're planning the new site to determine what you may need just from a strictly legacy point of view, not only the kind of new bells and whistles that people want to put on. Helping you in this in this process will be prioritization. So you're going to want to look at what's your kind of foundational content, what's the stuff that absolutely needs to be there that reflects the organization's ongoing mission, whatever it may be. If it's business, it's selling stuff. If it's policy organization, then they're going to have some key stuff about their organization and their key products that they've put out there that just absolutely have to be there. And then also, if they are having cross-cutting taxonomies, you're going to want to have those kind of mapped out and see, what's going to fit well within them or not. Also, have a discussion about media handling. Is it something important to kind of put into your own site, or are you going to leverage something like YouTube to make sure that you have some virality to any video content that you have? Then try to make sure that you bring into the conversation what content is going to be important to the users, because too often these conversations become what's important to someone on the board, what's important to Sally in this organization or in this part of the organization who has owned this one thing forever, and she's going to raise a fuss if she doesn't get her content in there, and she's going to feel devalued and that nobody's taking her seriously. But try to bring the conversation back to, okay, what's going to be important for users? Because frequently you can actually engage people like that and bring them into the process and actually have them talk about what's useful to the people they interact with, which other people in your web team may not know as well as these kind of individual stakeholders. That being said, sometimes there's just going to be content that just has to be there because those people are important and they have the clout, and you might fight the good battle for what's important to the user, but you're not going to win all those battles, and that's okay. Frequently it says something about the organization of what they deem as important, and that's, it may evince a deeper understanding of what their membership actually cares about if they've been successful in the past. And then make sure you're going through and grouping the like content and functionality. There's an opportunity here to kind of rationalize what you had in this old content. So if you have this part of the organization, this department that has videos and slideshows, and this department has videos and slideshows, well, maybe those can all be brought together into one thing. And that can have some commonality, and so you can look at, are there ways that we can bring those both in and actually save some time, and also save some construction costs for the new site where you're not having to duplicate a lot of functionality. So in those strategies, make sure that you keep in mind you're going to want to automate as much as possible, because you're probably going to do this more than once. You're going to want to leverage third-party solutions. So if somebody has export tool on an old application, take advantage of that. If there is a module, which we'll talk about a whole bunch of the ones that are available for Drupal, you're going to want to take advantage of those. But make sure that's in your planning process and that's part of your development estimation. You're going to have to build in these automated tools, knowing that ultimately they will save you time over simply doing everything manually. Even though there are parts, of course, you may still have to do manually. To that matter, deciding which approach to take, there are kind of smells. And you probably can't see in the back, it says please don't eat some smelly food from the London Underground. So you're going to see inconsistent formatting. That's probably a sign that you're not going to actually be able to automate things terribly well. And even if you do automate the bringing of that content over, it's going to lose its formatting in the new site, and so you're going to have to note that that's an area where you're going to need to do a lot of cleanup. You may not have access to the data store. So if it's on some legacy system and the people who set it up have moved on twice now and no one really knows how to get into it, or they're in a partnership agreement with somebody else and they don't really own it, well, that's something you're going to have to deal with, and that means you're probably going to have to manually migrate some of that stuff over. And of course, legacy media formats. So if you have those old, if you have old Flash videos or things in formats that were super neat back in 2001, and nobody supports anymore. If you have those cool old Google video things that they stop support for, you're going to have to take care of moving that stuff in. And so make that part of your plan, and know that in legacy content there may not always be an automated tool. So before I let Oscar talk about kind of what we've done and what's new, kind of a refresher of what Drupal migration used to be like, and so you can appreciate how much things have moved. So in old case, I had a Mambo site. This is the predecessor to Joomla, so this had been built before they actually forked off. And we were going into Drupal 5. We had around 60,000 data objects, so stories, authors, videos, text, audio, including integration with iTunes U, that all had to be brought over. And of course, the stuff was all siloed. They tried to do a good job of bringing stuff manually to the homepage, but it was all in old departments. And so they wanted everything to be interrelated to everything else. And of course, they didn't want to manually do that to all 60,000 data objects. So the way you had to do this at the time, because there weren't a lot of automated Drupal modules to kind of help it in any generic way, I ended up copying both sites to my local machine with all the gigs of video and data and the databases, and got everything running in the same area. And then I wrote custom scripts to migrate them. And part of that would be finding those interrelations as things came in, and then updating things as I found new links to them in the past, and then updating them within the database I'm writing to make sure that those interrelations are caught and preserved or created in the case of IP. So in both of those cases, it was really slow to try to bootstrap both of these applications and do the native writing or reading within them. It was actually easier to reverse engineer both of the databases and simply write the stuff to them and kind of hope it worked on the other side, which it mostly did. Until, of course, you get to some of the bits which are actually just written out to the database as serialized objects. And if you don't know that structure, it's kind of hard to reverse engineer that. But that's kind of what we had to do. There weren't very many tools to help port it, and so it was, a pretty big process. And since you're dealing with 60,000 content objects, having a slow script just wasn't an option. So there was a lot of trial and error and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat, and that's how you did it. So Oscar's now going to talk about how you do things in the modern world.
Yeah, Sandy's older than me, so he gets to talk about the bad old days more. So what are some of the modern techniques? There's a lot of Drupal modules that have come a long way that can help you automate a lot of these migrations, keep you sane, and keep you from pulling your hair out. We had to approach a situation where we migrated a legacy site that's been online for over a decade, a lot of static HTML content. We were given 12 SQL dumps from their databases to migrate in. This is an art-centered organization, so they had 290 or more video files, which was about 25 gig of data, 780 audio files in different formats, real audio, MP3s. Those were the major ones. When blogging got hip and cool, they launched 3 external blogs on WordPress, weren't even hosted on their main site, and no one ever looked to clean up their spam comments either. And as Sandy alluded to, they had different ways of displaying audio, some internal players, sometimes they just embed an MOV file, sometimes it's an FLV file, and they had slideshow tools that they used in their magazine port, and then some other slideshows over in some other section of the site related to people in the arts. And they clearly saw a need that wasn't going to scale for their team, that they needed a way to make the authoring process a lot easier, so it's not like one guy knows how to build one kind of slideshow but can't build them for the other ways. And also, this will help them distribute authoring outside of the organization, so their web team is less of a bottleneck for them. Right? This is where they chose Drupal. Most of the days, everyone any large organization is going to want an enterprise level CMS. Drupal can certainly fit the bill, give you that consistent role-based authoring so they can farm out press releases to the news team, and they can put them in, revise them, approve them without bugging the web team as much. Bring all their content from the external blogs into a centralized content repository that helps them standardize their presentation, and also leverage like a responsive design so they can say, their website looks good on a tablet, looks good on a mobile phone, as well as a desktop. And in theory, centralizing all this will help reduce maintenance costs. They don't have to worry about upgrading 3 separate WordPress blogs, keeping those up to date so they don't get hacked, and all their other scripts, PHP scripts, make sure they don't have any weird vulnerabilities. Putting it all under Drupal makes it a lot easier to stay on top of that stuff, especially if you're just using contributed modules for the bulk of your site. The foundation module for our work ended up being the creatively named Migrate module. It's pretty good. It has the technical aspects of it have a pretty steep learning curve, so hopefully I can give you some pointers to make that a little easier. It does have some examples bundled with it, so as you can look at the source code, and it's really well annotated and documented to see how to do a simple migration and then work your way up to the migration that handles media objects and more like tagging taxonomy as you're bringing it in. If you do some Google searches, there's some good blog posts too about how to work with the Migrate module. But basically what it does, it provides a framework where you can do migrations and redo them and roll them back. It can read data from a MySQL database, so you can create a query to tell it, here's the data I need to migrate, or it can look at an XML or CSV file as an import, and it kind of abstracts all that, the importing part, out for you. It gives you a nice UI to run them. You can run them through a web GUI or through Drush. You can run an import. If something went wrong, you can roll it back. So all the new content that just came in, you just imported 900 nodes, but there was something wrong and the titles weren't in the right character set. So if there's weird UTF characters in it, you can roll it back and fix your scripts and run it again. Or you can update content. So like, it worked fine, but you missed migrating a field, so you update the code. Instead of rolling back and importing, you can just update, and all the imported content will get updated with the new data. So basically what you end up doing is registering PHP classes that tell it how to query your CSV file or your database or whatever to get the content that you're going to bring in, and then iterate through it. Look at a piece of content. There's methods that you can use to clean up data. So one of the issues I had to deal with, among many, was that they had a year field, but it was just a four character field. It did 4 digits of 1999 or 2002. But if you're putting them into a date field in Drupal, it expects the format to be the ISO year, month, date. So you can do that cleanup in the PHP script so that when it goes to save into the node, it's the expected format and it gets saved. Another thing that was fun to deal with was they'd save file names in the database in the case, the letter case wouldn't match what was in the file system, so then when Drupal went to import them, it said, oh wait, this file doesn't exist, so I wouldn't have the image or the media file that I expected. So you can handle some of those like, oh, well, check if for some reason in the database the extension is in all caps, but in reality on the file system it's in lowercase, and clean that up. You can also say, do a test like, if this is older than 2005, just skip it, don't import it. You don't have to delete it out of your database or do anything weird with your queries. Or if your query is or if your test is more complicated than what you can do in SQL, you can do it in PHP. And then it'll save a new node for you or comment or whatever, and they'll give you a chance to process that new node too as part of the loop. And I use that to create URL redirects with that module, so that if I knew the old URL, my new site would know how to redirect from the old content to the new, and that's good for SEO. So the Migrate module is the basis for a bunch of other modules that then help you bring in content and handle different cases. One that you'll want, it should be pretty much bolted right onto Migrate. It's called Migrate Extras, and it provides capabilities to migrate content into the flag geofield media module, which we use a lot since we had a lot of MP3 and image files, organic groups and rules. So if you're dealing with migrating content into those, you'll want to look at that to have support via the Migrate module. Their initial approach was to, hey, we'll take care of migrating it, support for all the modules out there, but that doesn't scale well. So nowadays, most big modules like the date module, entity reference, link, and there's a bunch of others, now use the Migrate module's API to bake in support into that module. So if you're using the media module to handle, no, not media, but like date or entity reference to handle your content types, if you need to map fields from your old fields to the new, as long as you have the module, then you're good to go. Like I said, we have 3 WordPress blogs to bring in, and luckily there's a WordPress Migrate module. It worked really well. It imports content from WordPress using its WXR format. You can either go to your WordPress site and download that XML file. It's under the Tools, Export. It'll give you a big XML file with all your content. You can tell it, give me pages, give me posts, and it'll dump it all in. You can, if you feel adventurous, give the WordPress Migrate module your WordPress login, and it'll go generate it for you. If you like that sort of thing. In this case, we had a lot of, one of the blogs was active for like 5 or 6 years. And one thing that I ran into was I was having really big imports because the XML file included all the comments in the system, including the ones that were unapproved. So you might have to do some cleanup to get rid of unapproved comments before you do the export. Or if you're given the XML file, you can write a PHP script to take them out with the DOM extension. If you're running the media module and you have embedded images, it'll update those references to be media references. But one thing I ran into was like it kept the images the URLs pointing to the old blog URL, which would have not been fun to find out when they decommissioned those. So in the ticket queue, there's a patch available for actually going out, sucking that image into a file object on Drupal and updating the reference, so all your content is in Drupal. And this is for completeness. We weren't doing a Drupal to Drupal migration, but there is the Migrate D2D module that uses the Migrate API to help you migrate from a previous version. And in the latest beta release, it provides a wizard, so you can use the interface to map your old content to your new without doing any programming. The new Migrate module does that, but it's still in beta, and it wasn't something I worked with. I felt more comfortable writing the classes and being able to run them in the interface there. So those are the modules for automating it, and it was great because we could roll them back. If there was new content, we ended up with a 3-month gap after we did the initial WordPress import that then they kept blogging. Gosh darn it. So then we had to import all that again. It was really easy to grab that file, that XML file, and just say, hey, yeah, look, I'm such a rock star, it's already imported. But then a bigger component was just some late nights with a big cup of coffee, manually cutting and pasting some of their press releases going back 3 years. There you begin to notice they're like, they must have had interns doing this batch of press releases because the H3s are totally messed up, or in this case they'd used strong tags with font tags, and so we had to do some manual cleanup there. You want to determine what level you're going to commit to, otherwise it could get pretty crazy. One thing that helped us out on that was the WYSIWYG module and the Word cleanup from Word button. So we use that a lot to paste in old content that was kind of funky, and it would come out a lot better. But then we had to manually clean up some internal links, or we could have. So even if you do some manual copy and paste migrations, and your brain shuts down after a while, you may want to look at automating some. You will want to look at automating a lot of the cleanup that you're doing repetitively. So if you need to fix links going from the old URL to a new one, you can write a pretty quick script using the batch API or something that will go through all your nodes and look for the old URL or old domain name and map it to a new one, or just strip out absolute links. I had to do that because the blogs were all on their own subdomains, but now they're going to be all on the same one, and they all would occasionally link to each other. So I had to go, okay, for linking from blog A to blog B, now we got to use the new internal links that the patch auto module in Drupal set up. The other thing you'll want to look at is extracting keywords and mapping to any taxonomies that you've defined in the new site that maybe weren't used in the old one, or the names are slightly different. A lot of their WordPress categories, they'd have like 4 ways to tag something that was now 1 tag in Drupal. So you can manually do those kind of string comparisons and save you the headache of, oh, did I miss 1 or 2 here or there? Just that's a perfect task to automate and let a computer do. If you're the final bit of cleanup, you may use the Migrate module to import, a roster of people or important honorees that they have, or publications list. If you import it via the Migrate module and then you clean up some stuff manually, and then you realize, oh, I need to rerun my import again to update all the nodes. If you run it, you'll blow away your changes. So you want to save any sort of real manual fixes on content till the very end, when you know you're not going to be running the Migrate module anymore. That kind of feeds into why you want to do repeatable or partial migrations. As you're running these, you're going to have failures. You're going to be learning like, oh, 80% of the content is good, but in this case, they forgot to specify a year, or I need to extract it from the body because it was tacked on at the end of the body and not as a separate field. You'll have to keep in mind, as Sandy said, websites don't stand still, so we started this project at the end of last year. They're still putting out press releases, they're still blogging. We did a import of their WordPress blogs last week, but they're still blogging, so there's going to be some delta that you'll have to account for, either if budget for doing multiple migrations, or just make it clear with your client, hey, this is the last one we're going to do. Anything after this you guys can use as a training exercise, or you're on the hook to do that. Migrations. Of course, one risk with a site that's ongoing is that your client might add new functionality. They have a new initiative and they want some cool mapping tool, or they need to do some integration with a third party that wasn't part of your original scope. So that's a risk to be aware of, and hopefully you have a good client relationship that conversation isn't too combative. Yeah. It helps to joke a lot at client meetings, I find. And going back to what Sam said, if you want to do an agile, this is not on the slide, it just occurred to me. You want to do an agile process where your client is reviewing early and giving you feedback. Yes, this looks right. No, we don't want this layout. And one thing, if usually you'll be working with the web team who's responsible for maintaining the site. That's a chance to give them early exposure to the backend in Drupal. So if they're like, hey, can we change the sort on our publications field? You can, just in a meeting with them, click through the views module and say, yeah, look how easy it is. And get them more used to seeing how things are done with Drupal, so that if they request something that's kind of that final 10% of functionality that usually requires a little bit of custom code, you can push back and say, no, what if we did it this other way? We sort of get what you need, but it's not like an onerous task that's going to blow up everybody's budget or make the site not work as easy. These are links to the different modules I mentioned. If you're looking for a real deep dive into the technical aspects of the Migrate module, a colleague of mine did move my contact content presentation at the Florida Drupal camp, and that's the link to it. We'll post our slides online afterwards too, so you can access them.
Being recorded.
Oh, and it's being recorded. But that one really gets into the nitty-gritty. How do you set up your classes? What are the different methods you can hook into for processing data? I know Hugh's doing a lot of like reading data from XML files and not a database and that sort of thing. And working with revisions, which luckily we didn't have to do. Turn it over to Sandy to wrap up.
So, just to let you know who we are, our company's musketeers.me. That's where we do our consulting type stuff. But we also own PHP Architect, which is a training brand and does books, training, has a magazine called PHP Architect, and we put on the PHP Tech Conference. So if you want a subscription to the magazine, use that code for a 25% discount. Upcoming, we have a summit on PHP 5.5. So if you're a programmer and wanting to know kind of what tools will be available for you if you upgrade to the latest version of PHP, which, you know, as Symfony components get migrated into Drupal 8, you're going to actually be able to take advantage of some of this stuff because Symfony's well set up to take advantage, especially of some of the new object-oriented features. We'll have a lot of stuff about that.
5.3 is end of life too, so
Yeah.
if you haven't migrated to at least 5.4, then you're not going to get security updates.
Yeah, so we have a year with 5.3 left. So any questions?
Can you recommend any resources for migrating static content to HTML PDF that are into Drupal besides the role you're on the
Kettle, probably?
Yeah, so ETL tools are good for doing that sort of thing. Kettle is an open source one. It's not easy to learn, but if you have somebody dedicated, you know, that is a good way. And it does sort of the same thing the Migrate module does, but at an even more abstract level. So it doesn't really care what you're going to. It abstracts how to output the information. It also abstracts how to pull in the information, and so you just have to adapt to whatever you're pulling from. And so one of those can be actually spidering a site, bringing those in, translating the XHTML or HTML to XML, you know, processing it through the document object model and pushing it on to your end content. That's also a place to consider just writing your own script. PHP has great XML tools, so you actually can do that. Write a quick module or just write a standalone script to go out, spider things with curl and bring them in and do the same process, just doing it in PHP.
Is Kettle like a scraper?
No, it's an ETL tool. And
Okay.
Is it extract, transform, load?
It's a Java program, I think.
Yeah, these are used, a lot of business, you'll see them kind of hooked up with business intelligence tools because a lot of them are kind of, and actually Kettle is part of a larger business intelligence tool where what they do is they go out and they grab data from all kinds of different stores throughout an enterprise and you know, bring it up to the level where you can actually, you know, run reports and that sort of thing across everything you're doing.
I'm curious if you could comment on any customers where maybe they wanted to do some or all of the migration themselves, and maybe any midway or hybrid approaches where you kind of helped them a bit, but you didn't do all the migration on your.
Yeah, actually, this was one that we'd done as kind of a cost-saving measure. Both of us used to work with Forum 1. I saw a couple of Forum 1ers pop in the back. And one of the things we would do there is if, you know, the final estimate came up too big and they said, you know, well, you know, is there some way we can bring it down? And said, okay, well, if you want to put some sweat equity into it, you know, here are things you can do for, you know, migrating the stuff, and that'll take it off our plate. And then what you're doing is you're doing much more of a training exercise up front to kind of help them. If there's something particular that, you know, is just going to be a lot easier to to do through an automated import, you can do that and kind of use that as part of the bargaining process. If you're talking with an external, you know, client, if you're doing it within an organization, then sometimes it's a way to kind of talk about a time issue of, Well, if you put that off entirely to the web team, that's going to bring the whole project out longer. But I can also set this up and have you bringing in content throughout this process after you're part of the agile. The agile approach is done and kind of locked down. They can start bringing that in, and you can just make that part of your process.
When you're doing runs with the Migrate module or say feeds, and you want to speed that process up, say you want to run the whole process and see what you got at the end, what kind of hardware would you throw at it? Is this database intensive? Is it CPU intensive? Is it memory intensive? Where do you find the loads go to speed up a really big migration run, say a couple 100,000 nodes?
Yeah, the Migrate module uses the batch API to do its imports, so you shouldn't run into memory issues unless it's set really low, but it's probably more going to be the CPU-bound process because you're doing some transformation. That said, our biggest actual imports were just a couple thousand nodes, so we didn't really run into any performance issues.
And on the one where in the old days where I'd done the 60,000, it was noticeably easier. At one point I'd actually gone down the route of trying to load the bootstrap and do all of that, and that's when I ended up having to do that just to kind of take all the overhead that Drupal introduces as a way of giving you flexibility, but you can dispense with if you have a very narrow need. That being said, it kind of depends on what you're doing. Obviously, if you're going app to app and database to database, then frequently, especially if you're doing if you're having to write, stop, look up some more data, rewrite, and that sort of thing, then you are going to have a big database load. But in all of these things, memory is probably going to be a big area where you're going to want to stack up on whichever machine you're doing, and that'll help you as much as CPU.
Where are the slides going to be posted?
Slides will be posted off of, we'll put them both.
Blog about it.
Yeah, we'll blog about it at musketeers.me, and then assuming this recording worked out, then presumably it'll be with all the others for the conference.
I think it's important to reiterate that it's the job of most Mantra modules now to provide their own Migrate classes if they're going to. That's a really confusing thing for a lot of people starting out with Migrate modules to build with Migrate extras. A lot of things are out of date. For instance, the community module provides its own class. So you might go rooting around in Migrate extras hoping to have this, but you're actually hand coding this up to the community module to give you that class and hoping you can find out. But this is something I'm facing in migrating a bunch of organic groups, like thousands of organic groups. Because OG's Migrate support isn't super awesome right now. So
Organic groups is not known for playing well with much of anything, but sometimes builds build. Anything else?
I think
before we go?
did you have a question?
Yeah, just a quick question. I would assume there's large benefits to using Migrate D2D as opposed to the migration process of the upgrade from Drupal 6 to 7. Is that correct in my assumption?
Yeah, it's. I mean, we don't have a ton of personal experience doing that one, but every time that I've ever attempted to do an in-place update, so much changes from one to the other that you're going to end up having to rebuild everything, and it actually becomes a lot cleaner if you blow away the cruft by simply taking out the content you want and pulling it in.
Gotcha.
Just one more resource, ptmash.com
ptmash.com.
has both standard and dynamic migrations, and he's gone through and explained how to do it, and has examples of it.
What's
Like
that? What was that say?
So it's a good example. Apparently they have a lot of examples and sample code at GitHub at ptmash.com.
Cool.
Yeah, I forgot to mention.
Thanks, everybody.
Hi, Brian.
Is this based in Virginia or Washington DC, or where's this?
Yes.
I've seen
We're
you
completely remote.
for years, and actually I was working in Southampton, and we recommended to have one of your subscriptions to your magazine. It was very interesting and all the contents, articles and all that, but I never knew. And I've seen it. I received like an email still from Hitch architect.
We're gonna have a.
I don't know. It's huge,
Okay.
but I never knew where.
The previous
The hall was crazy.
we took over in January, and we're based around DC. We all work from home.
Let's do it easy. Hey.
Are you doing any consulting work right now in Drupal? Or anything that is PHP? Are you hiring? All right. Oh, that's good, but I like
Watch the tape.
I'm still a subscriber, but only for the email stuff. I never really had like a magazine. Only on Musarin. I don't know if those guys still have it or not. It was back in 2009, I guess. So I don't know if anything changed from that time to now, but it was very good as far as the technology that they were. They were being released on the PHP world. What we were doing here was
Because like I look at the code and it doesn't make any sense to me, and I feel like it could if there was somebody who sat down and just explained it step by step more than the documentation does.
Yeah.
I think
I think one of the links we gave has some more
My name is
kind of ways we've gone through
The
it.
Florida one?
Yeah.
Yeah,
What
I
I
looked at
do is
that.
look at that one, and then I would check out the site that this guy over here
Yeah, I thought
Where's your left?
But other than that, I'm not personally aware of it. I'll check the monster. I'm not going to run it 10 because I'm not personally aware of it. Unfortunately, it's a little bit gearhead oriented.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, it makes a lot of assumptions if you know a lot of things already, and I'm self-taught, I don't.
Not necessarily Drupal, but
But
as
I
I
feel
said,
like I'm
anything that is
small.
open source.
I could do it,
Yep.
I just
It
need,
just needs to be
it needs to be a little bit slower
That
than
kind of
it's currently expressed.
kind of engagement
Sorry.
that I've been having.
Little something about the recording equipment.
I'll do anything.
This is the microphone. So, I mean, it's just a laptop. There's nothing special about it. We're just using the internal one.
Okay. Broke it down a little bit more than the documentation.
Just talk loud. Try not to wander
That I
away from
found.
it too far.
I tried. I had to kind of group.
Hopefully you don't wander.
I do. So.
Just be really loud. Talk towards this at all times. I mean,
Yeah,
we
so
move it
you
to the
want-
edge.
had one that I-
Yeah, we can move it a little bit.
That'd be
It does
great.
a pretty good job of picking you guys up, though.
Okay.
So
Um,
just be cognizant of
Sure, man.
the microphone.
Of course.
found like a good tutorial.
It's really easy. I just need you guys, once you get plugged in, are you switching laptops
Yeah.
midway through the presentation?
Oh, no, it's all
good.
So all I need you guys to do, once you get plugged in, I'm going to tell you everything's set. All you need to do is hit record, and when you're done, hit stop.
Okay.
You can do that.
I
And
can do that.
that is it.
I can do that.
And
Do we have to give the presentation?
Oh, okay.
Well, it's,
You
yeah.
just do that, leave.
I don't know if DTD
Yeah. All you do, hit record, and just walk out
Just
of
walk
it.
out.
At like,
I
maybe
I
2 or
felt
3
that,
minutes
that'd
in,
be part of the way
I'm
there,
just
but
gonna
I
like
started
pop in,
trying to use the
give you guys a
term.
thumbs up.
Yeah.
If it looks good,
We
what
actually
you should
started
see
working
up here,
together
you'll see down here.
Okay.
So if that all looks good, just give me a thumbs up back. Otherwise, I'll just walk
Yeah,
in.
and
It'll
basically when that ends,
So once you guys get plugged in, I'll probably be back.
are like, hey, we like
Thanks.
working.
Yeah, we'll be
together.
plugged in a couple minutes.
Hit wall on it, so.
Formed a company.
Yeah. So the thing I found is to set source query if you can to query the database. Although if you're querying for a node, you can get like fields and stuff. Your query is pretty crazy.
I think that's the primary issue that our state needs.
Yeah.
That needs to come to everything.
Oh.
The other thing I could do is do an
Just
iterative
a shadowy,
here
spooky
instead of,
blob.
like, dump your nodes from G5 into like a
We all set,
normalized
Corey?
table
Maybe I'll make everybody
for
laugh.
content type that you can then query from
So like a single table.
EL fields and more.
I guess find a place that goes.
Yeah.
Here. Let's not show my boot up screen.
Sure.
Oops, sorry, man.
I think my bag is back here, sorry.
Yeah,
it is. Can we stay and harass you guys?
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, please.
Just throw stuff at us from the back.
You'll want to come back.
that's not
You'll
why
want
we
to come
did it.
back after you see this presentation.
We're smiling, skipping.
It's about responsive design.
Yeah, true.
Tools that we've built to make our life.
Oh, you gonna show me?
Yeah.
Or do you whatever?
Shit.
Nice presentation.
Should we ask about swearing? Like 2 minutes. 3 minutes actually.
Are you offended easily?
Yeah. We're gonna get recorded.
It's been recording the whole time.
Find beer.
So we got
You and your freaking Windows laptop.
boy, that's gonna take forever.
What'd you do to it?
Power takes time to load, my friend. There we go.
There it is.
It reminded me that I don't.
Yes.
I
Although this
seriously,
wasn't bad coming to DC.
I want to convert. I'll take an answer.
Summertime usually. Maybe
No, I'll walk all the way back around that way.
Oh, clever.
Clever.
Well played. Well
I
played.
think about life value.
I'm just like, ah! What am I gonna do? I gotta get out behind the table. Corey, project.
All right.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Alright, plug it in. Hold on.
So like all the
Troubles in Paradise?
Nope.
Yeah, somebody just has to use a Windows machine and it takes forever.
Yeah, we're not all perfect.
I know.
Yet.
Plugging you in, Corey.
So when I want to change things, I just walk over here.
Spacebar or the right arrow, if I can do it.
So do you have to like put it into some sort of presentation mode? Because I've noticed that with Windows laptops. I don't know, everyone makes some weird ass like key. Yeah, that thing.
The projector's not on.
It should be on. We're just not sending it anything at the moment. Yep, good. I got Sigil. So the projector should be getting text.
I love projectors.
Okay, so everything that I said earlier still stands.
Sure, man.
Oh, someone's